picking up. So remember that life's greatest lessons are usually learned from the worst times and the worst mistakes. Very, very appropriate quotation based on what I've just been talking about. So, well, I talked about transitions for change. Basically, all our lessons come from the transitions that occur. And I used to like to think of this as in terms of businesses, where you are today and where you want to be tomorrow. And during that transition, things go well and things go wrong, as I've mentioned. And I quite often think about the bridge analogy. You stood on the riverbank and you want to be on the other side, because the grass is greener, there's trees, there's mountains. And the challenge is always how to build that bridge and how to get across there. And during that process of building the bridge, there's an awful lot of learning, a lot of things that we can apply the next time we're in a similar situation. So again, we come back to this lifetime learning, and where we find learning is much of what we learn is we are taught as like teachers, mentors, friends, neighbours, and another source of learning comes from stories. Storytelling's become very big today, and there's a friend of mine in the audience today, Nick Warren. He specialises in actually helping people tell their business, their stories there, and this is a very powerful learning tool, which we tend to overlook quite often. Observation is another source of learning. I spend a lot of time being a problem solver. A lot of my time is spent watching, looking for patterns, things that don't fit. And learning is one of the hardest skills to learn. It takes quite a bit of practice. In fact, a lifetime, if you practice yoga like I do, it's a lifetime occupation. You never really sort of get there. It's a process that matters. And change really is just another form of learning. Okay, so just allowing, because I know there's a bit of a time. Okay. So let's just recap on this. So learn and succeed. So shared individual knowledge, experience, insights, thoughts is these positive points of learning. Post-project delivery, lessons learned. I've been involved with many of these with Ford and General Motors. Hindsight engineering, reverse engineering. These are all forms of learning in the motor trade. I know when we've worked with Isuzu of Japan, they would buy a competitor's vehicle and they would completely take it to pieces and then rebuild it again and see how long it would take to build the car. It's all part of developing, learning from your competitors. Or direct from the horse's mouth, customer feedback. Team building is another one. Team building tends to use reflection to improve performance. And over here, there's a couple of quotes. If a scientist makes a mistake, it's a new invention. If a tailor makes a mistake, it's a new fashion. And, these are all sources of learning. In some cases, we fail to succeed. And what I mean by that, it's got a bit of a double meaning, but there's a lot of people that fail. Through the failure, they actually succeed. 7-Up is a classic story. There are many stories as to how 7-Up got its name. One of those stories, or one of those versions, is that it was their 7th attempt to launch a lemonade product. Natural disasters are lessons. They're cruel in nature, but are pure learning. In businesses, we often learn lessons from, as I've mentioned already, from breakdowns, failures, errors. and we learn from our own mistakes and indeed from other people's mistakes. Again, I mentioned earlier, accidents provide learning because they motivate us into doing something to make an improvement in order that the accident doesn't reoccur. And errors, again, are a source of inspiration to do better next time. An interesting statistic I've put on this slide is 80% of apps, this is mobile apps, are removed after the single use due to crashing and freezing, which for me, that's quite an alarming statistic. And it becomes apparent as I go through the presentation why this sort of thing occurs. As I mentioned earlier, stories are great sources of learning. This is my first story that I'm sharing with you. And when I worked at General Motors, I was in charge of the paint shop control system. And when they launched the Frontera, there was within quite quickly they got into trouble on the south side. There was like a 6-month waiting list and growing. It was such a problem that General Motors Detroit decided to send over their #1 troubleshooter. And I remember this guy turned up in this really shiny brown suit, and I was invited to this meeting. And as I was sat in the meeting, I had the president of Isuzu Japan sat next to me, the president of General Motors, the head of operations for Europe, GM Europe, my unit manager, and myself. And it was quite a daunting experience for me because I'd never been involved in anything quite like this. And so he opened up the conversation why he was here, and then he immediately jumped on me and said, right, I want you to tell me, Perry, what are the top 3 problems in the paint shop? So without any sort of delay, I just gave him the top 3. And the one thing that caught his attention was I said, return to paints. He didn't understand that. He said, and despite explaining it, he still didn't understand it. So he asked me to prepare a presentation on what it was and what we needed to do to fix it and what we needed from him and to go back to GM. So I did the presentation. I went into the meeting room to do a bit of a practice because I'd never done a presentation. And this is in the days when we used to have, overhead projectors. And I was hoping that, that the overhead projector, the bulb would go just at the right moment. But there was no chance of that because my boss made me actually put a new bulb in. So anyway, while I was doing my rehearsal, Mr. GM troubleshooter came into the room. Shortly after my boss had been in, and my boss had been in and he'd removed 2 slides from the presentation, screwed them up and put them in the bin. The troubleshooter guy came in, went straight to the bin, took the 2 pages out, put them in his folder and just winked at me and went out. And at that point, the blood started to drain from me. I was totally drained. Anyway, we came to the follow-up meeting. I did my presentation. And he then produced the 2 slides that was taken out and looked at my boss and said to him, your career is over. Basically, what he'd removed was the slide that actually where I'd put down what the root cause of the problem was. And I'd actually pointed to the marketing blunder because what actually was causing the problem, the root cause, was when they did the original market research, the ratio for short wheelbase, sporty type to long wheelbase was 60-40. In reality, the long wheelbase was selling far greater. In fact, it was 70-30 for long wheelbase, and that presented a lot of problems in the paint shop. But the lesson here was the fact that he knew exactly the behaviour of the unit managers in the plants, and he knew that if the fact that you went straight to the waste bin, he knew. I don't know whether I was actually set up to catch my boss out or what, but at the end of the day, he knew exactly where to go to find the information, and that sort of. I can remember when I did the presentation that it was like I was just waiting for the axe to fall. So that was the first there's lots of stories like this, and these are the sort of things where you pick up some priceless little tips from people that go around that I mean, this guy sat on the board at GM, so he was very highly respected. But he got down to the because that was the information he wanted to know. He wanted to know why the paint shop wasn't working properly, and he got his answer from the waste paper bin rather than the presentation. Anyway, so why are lessons important? The struggle you're in today is developing the strength you need for tomorrow. It's another quote, an unknown source, I don't know, but for me, it's very apt when we're talking about lessons learned. So, learning to succeed, everything in life, on the previous presentation, I've talked about the natural flow of life, and in business has a natural flow as well. And it's when you get an interruption that we actually start learning something, because if everything just ticked along without a problem, we would just become very complacent and wouldn't learn it. So when we get these interruptions, this is when we start to learn. So there's a few things we need to make a note of here. Problems in business are inevitable. There are going to be problems. I mean, COVID is a classic example. Nobody saw that one coming. And it's, a virus that we can't even see, has wreaked havoc around the world. All businesses are vulnerable to the planned, and unexpected changes. No one is immune to making mistakes. Businesses exist and evolve due to this flow and the interruptions to it. The nice thing about lessons is it keeps us connected to this natural flow, to this flow of things. So the lessons add value because we solve problems, we correct errors, we can basically do all these things. Fixing all these things adds value. It allows us to connect. It adds values because we can connect, engage, and empower all the stakeholders, which is very important. It expands our knowledge, and it enables us to create a competitive advantage, particularly in business. And the other thing it does that's very important is it drives the vision for the future, and it gets you closer to achieving your mission. And what we're talking about here is we are talking about optimizing our strengths, innovating weaknesses, exposing opportunities, and exploiting threats. In other words, thinking about these things in a much more positive light. The SWOT analysis is a very popular tool still used today, but it needs with lessons learned. The way that what I am talking about today is it needs to be a much more positive approach to this. So lessons learned are opportunities. It offers a means of reducing those increasing costs, loss of business that we're experiencing, loss of market share, loss of reputation, and losing good people. Because the casualty, in business is we do lose good people. And lessons learned, and involving people in lessons learned, giving them a chance to improve their work environment is a really good way of keeping people longer term. It allows businesses to evolve and create. We've talked about these before, the next USP and competitive advantage. Any deviation offers an opportunity to enhance a product or service. So this is why it's important. Caption learning is what drives innovation and future growth. So the second story today involves a project that I wasn't actually involved with, but the project got into trouble, and I actually, using some nail varnish, actually say the project sounds a bit bizarre, but it's really a true story. I got a call from a customer. I was working as a service engineer at the time, and I was traveling the length and breadth of the UK and Ireland, and we were installing these very, very, very good Garvin's inline checkways, and I was the main, sort of the only service engineer, so I was extremely busy with various projects, so busy so that this particular installation was installed by the designer himself. He came over and did the installation. So when I got a call to a customer threatening to rip the equipment out, and the guy had been there the day before, I was a bit suspicious. So I remember on the way up in the car, I was on the way up to Spennymoor, I was thinking, I wonder if this is like a power supply type, because there was 4 machines involved here. Anyway, I got there and had a look, took a look at the first machine. I noticed some scratches on one of the motherboards, which made me a little bit even more suspicious. So I set all the machines up, got them working, got all the products programmed in again, all set up, and everything was working really well. Everything was in spec. So the scratches on the motherboard was bothering me a little bit. So I thought, okay, I need to actually make a record of what I've set everything. So what I did, I asked one of the ladies on the line if she had some nail varnish I could borrow, because what I basically wanted to do was to mark up the settings I've put in, so there's a bit of a benchmark. And obviously, it being a production line and it's all women, I got all the usual banter, Mavis is she's into a bit of cross-dressing and stuff like that. But anyway, I got the nail varnish, I sealed the thing. And as luck would have it, I'd actually left my timesheet pad in the car. So it meant walking all the way out the factory, down to the car park, picked the timesheet. So I did all that, went back, met the boss, explained what I'd done. And he was that sort of still agitated. He wanted me to come down and show him what I'd done. So as we went down, as we turned the corner and walked into the area, the line supervisor was inside one of the machines making an adjustment with a screwdriver. So to cut a long story short, basically there was 12 women worked in this area, and these 4 new machines weren't basically going to make them redundant, but there was going to be 8 of the girls be redeployed somewhere else. And this guy was actually servicing all 12 women in the area, so he was deliberately sabotaging the equipment. And so the little pot of nail varnish was, because when he took his screwdriver out, you could clearly see there was still wet nail varnish on his screwdriver. So, and that's it. These the sort of things that opened my eyes a little bit, because I didn't really believe that sort of stuff would go on, But then again, I was a young lad still, a little bit green behind the ears. But those are the sorts of, they're all these little things teach us something, that was an unusual experience for me at that age anyway. So when do you capture lessons learned? You've got to know when it's time to turn the page. It's very, very true. I don't know how many times this is a sort of a recent quote I found, but it sort of hits me in the face, this one, because there's a lot of times when you do need to know when it's time to turn the page and move on. And that's what we're talking about here. When do you capture lessons? Generally, it's usually action-reaction approach. Trial and error cycle is quite common. A lot of, when we're developing something, we just trial and error. I used to work for a company years ago called F&H, and they were nicknamed Frigate and Hope. But that wasn't just because the F&H was in the title, in their name. The name, they actually were a company that would take on anything, and they had they were a software house, and they had some incredible individuals in there, could do things even today, I think some people would think were impossible, but they did have this frigate and hope approach to get things done, but they always got there. The other source is post-project reviews, fault finding, and then customer feedback. And a big example of 5G here, 1G didn't work, 2G didn't work very well, 3G didn't work, 4G. And I don't, for me, fiber is really the only option for networks, particularly now we're in this period of everybody's on Zoom all of a sudden. We've already experienced today 2 or 3 dropouts, problems today, that the network is not as good as it should be. So project life cycle. So capturing lessons should occur throughout the life cycle of a project. And the example I'm showing here is Heathrow Airport. I worked on a project there with managing the requirements. And you can see from this diagram that they are basically 8 checkpoints, and all the link backs are all the various points of validation where we validate through the process. So we're validating constantly to make sure by the time we come to implementation, the solution we've achieved 95% to 99%. We know that the solution's going to work. So before we've actually implemented it, so there's an awful lot of assurance work goes on. It's very expensive, but you know, when you consider the costs involved in airports, it's essential. The other one here, we'll start off with an interesting statistic. We're talking now about the true cost in terms of time, but software developers make 100 to 150 errors every 1,000 lines of code, which for me is very alarming, because when I used to write code, we weren't allowed to, there was no room for error. We didn't, you know, it was unheard of that you'd make a mistake. So what this graph shows is it's a case of timing. If you find there's a problem in a requirement and it's a bit ambiguous, you can fix it at the requirement stage. And in terms of this chart, let's just say, for instance sake, it costs you €1 to fix that requirement. As you go through the various stages of the project, through procurement, design, implementation, test, acceptance, use and maintenance, the cost for that error goes up quite dramatically. In fact, the research has shown it can be as much as 200 times. And it's a cost you could end up having to live with rather than being a one-off fixed cost. It ends up being one of those ongoing costs. So it's important when, you know, so it is important when you want to apply, you know, apply a lesson. So capturing lessons, you know, when you capture a lesson can have a severe effect, severe impact, cost impact. So few businesses, if any, actually apply lessons learned initiatives. I know from working with Ford and GM, they do. They're very active with improvements, and they do build their lessons learned into future vehicle models. And so it should be an integral part of every project. It should be adopted in the initial stages of planning. So that's important. And it should occur throughout the life cycle of a project, or the frame or the window in which you're operating with. If you're looking at the analogy, the transition analogy earlier, we're talking between where you are today and where you want to be tomorrow. And it needs to be communicated throughout the organization as part of a lessons learned database or a training program, sharing program. So who should capture lessons? Who should capture the lessons learned? One man's fault is another man's lesson. There's only one slide on this, because basically it should involve all stakeholders. So that can be human-machine interfaces and other non-human sources, because today there's a lot to talk about artificial intelligence, machine learning, and you know, these data sources are, you know, can be priceless going forward for those that are using them. It applies to all forms of change involving people. People are an incredible asset and knowledge base. You'll be surprised at how much knowledge people who just turn up, clock in 9 to 5, or do a 6 till 10 or 2 to 10 shift. You'll be surprised how much they know about the process they work on. You'll be shocked. And it should include team members who are involved throughout project lifecycle. And what we're talking about, or what I'm talking about here, is we are talking about accessing the secret intelligence that exists in every business, and unlocking that the innovative mindsets of your people that work in those. So basically, it should involve anyone that's had a part to play in that transition. So how do we capture them? Lessons captured is knowledge squared, is what I'd like to try and convince you of here today. So what I've done here is, these are from all the programs I've run with various companies. These are the I think are the main components for lessons learned that you should incorporate. There should be some form of category, and that is usually life cycle or knowledge area, but there are others. Should capture the nature of the issue, what went right or what went wrong, should include both those, and then detail on the impact each has had. And then metrics, you need to have metrics. You must be able to rate these in some scale, because, and the main reason for that is, if you start doing this with teams, you'll be surprised at the volume of feedback you'll get. And obviously what you need to be able to do is to rate them in terms of the value to the business. And recommendations is, again, we mentioned it earlier, it's based around optimizing and effectively they're taking the SWOT and turning the SWOT components into everything into a positive state. So in terms of categories, they should be considered right at the start. You should think about how you're going to categorize stuff. Generally, as I said, they're sort of project phase or knowledge areas, but you can tailor them. And in some cases, it can be tailored to provide real value to the organization and for future generations of your product or service. And I mean, you can tailor it to suit a specific hypothesis you want to test, but the important thing is you do need to categorize stuff to make it easier and save time later on. I've put some examples here of categories. Knowledge areas you'll see here: procurement, risk, integration, quality, time, cost, scope, human resource, communications. These are management or leadership areas, whichever way you want to really look at that. Life cycle, requirements, procurement, design, implementation, test, acceptance, use. And then the V model. There are various V models, but this is the one that I've worked with. And or you can just go for a very simple rating system, which is a good thing to do. Just even if you just say it was a positive or a negative thing. Because basically 80% of success, from my experience, has been in the planning. There's been projects when I was project managers at GM and Ford where I've delayed a milestone deliberately because we haven't done enough planning. Content is king. Again, content should be considered in advance. It should be captured you should think about what the content that you're looking for in terms of adding value, being valuable and useful going forward. And it needs to be consistent. So you need to sort of, if you're evolving your lessons learned, you need to obviously maintain as much consistency as possible. Okay, ways. I've put down a few ways here in which you can capture the knowledge. And it's brainstorming for internal teams, workshops, all stakeholders, journals, project journals. Not sure how much those are used, but I used to use project journals when I was a project manager. Offsites for focus groups, where they might be focused on a specific thing. Feedback forms for existing and future customers. Interviews, human resource, questionnaires, market research, mainly used for market research, but can be used for other things as well. Team meetings, project, product, service meetings, toolbox talks. Those are those that work on site on construction stuff will be familiar with what they mean by those, but basically they're daily project meetings to sort of agree, talk about where they are in the project, etc. So those are just some. There's loads more, but these are the fairly common ones. And again, back to metrics. Metrics is a must. It is the most effective way to route to a satisfactory solution, and one that is sustainable as well. And that's the important thing. They provide early warnings. If you look at the V model that we ran at Heathrow Airport, we got early warnings by assuring the design at various stages, whether there was a potential problem coming up. They provide valuable insights that can be used to make informed decisions. If you need to justify cost expenditure, if you've used metrics properly, it becomes much easier to justify extra spend, or why there was overspend. And if you're ISO 9000 accredited, then they provide demonstrable evidence and 100% traceability as well. So it's just as important to measure the right thing as well as not measuring at all. This is an FMEA, and this is something I've used. So in engineering terms, this is just an example here. What I'm just quickly to show is that through the design of various robot cells around the world, this technique I've been using FMEAs now for a long time, but basically what I'm showing is here is they are using the RPN just to show that there's measuring the improvement they've made with the measures they put in. And all this information in Ford and GM provides useful information going forward when they put out their next specification for a cell, because they can incorporate things that we discovered during the design phases. So it's a very good example. It's very, they've been around a long time, and they can be used in business. You can set up, I've got a thing called a business FMEA matrix, which I use. So what we're talking about here, what I'm leading into here is this participative learning. And the diagram here has been modified. Anybody that's in HR might have seen this, because this is it's talking about the difference between participative change cycle and the direct change cycle, which in lessons learned, it has to be participative change cycle. So we capture new knowledge, we share the new data, make it available to individuals, group. And the idea is we're looking to get acceptance of the data with a positive attitude and a commitment to a desired change, rather than saying to people, right, we're installing a SAP system next year, and this is the way we're going to do it. This is the opposite way around, if you like. And the key thing is I've added in the decision-making part of it, because the decision-making is where the knowledge transfer occurs. And team participation to enable the product or service to evolve. So it's a lot about team, and anybody that's venturing into AI or machine learning solutions need to really understand that it depends on learning human intelligence. So if you're going to install an ERP system, a lot of people try and sell you one solution fits all, but really, if you've got a system that's working very well and you're just looking to improve efficiency, then really the tools that you employ should emulate what you've already got and build on it, not actually tailor your current business to fit inside the tool. So team challenge process, we basically, we have 4 approaches, and this is the only sort of bit of sales pitch that I'm doing, but it highlights what we're doing. We have 4 particular approaches: pressure test, work related, and social tests, and they're all geared at basically allowing you to access the intelligence in your business, unlock the innovative mindsets, and bring learning back into organizations. And we have different techniques for different scenarios. So we look at problem solving, managing change, and building teams. The intelligent matrix is something we've just recently started, which is it's a learning resource, and basically this presentation here will be broken up into little bite-size modules, and that will be accessible to those that want it in the matrix. So summary, keep it simple. So the 9 takeaways that I've put together, maybe you've picked up other things, which is good if you have, but basically the 9 things I would like people to go away thinking about is: lessons occur as a result of a form of change. Change provides lessons when applied in the future become evolution. Change creates a transition from one state to another, and with positive and negative outcomes. And these are all sources of learning. Content and criteria for lessons need to be determined in advance. And it's important to capture what went wrong and what went right as well. You need to understand why something works so well. Lessons learned must be adopted throughout project life cycle and include all stakeholders. So the success criteria which I covered was category, issue, problem, success, impact, rating, and recommendation. I think those are the key things. If you develop a lessons learned program, when you collect the data, need to include those to be categorized in or collected in those formats. Team approach, again, participative change cycle to capture, share, and evolve. And you need to create the right environment, which is what we specialize in at Team Challenge Process, is creating the right environment. And we can do this remotely as well. I mean, just the fact that we've had to move on to Zoom, it doesn't matter if you've got teams working remote, we can do this remotely quite easily. So what we're talking about is accessing the secret intelligence and unlocking innovation within your business. And those are the sort of 9 takeaways from today. And just to close up the one-page cure whole thing, those that saw some of the previous presentations will be familiar with it. But basically, these 12 keywords are the 12 foundations for success, whatever you're doing. And in this matrix, there are 4 flows, 4 transitions, and there are three channels of knowledge. And I haven't really got time to go into this, but I just want to focus on the fact that under each of these foundations, lessons learned, this is what lessons learned contributes to it. So in terms of vision, you have customers who value you and your products and services. In terms of resource, highly effective and motivated teams. And for mission, narrows your focus so that you achieve your purpose. In terms of knowledge, you access that secret intelligence in your business, that untapped knowledge. Options, you're able to unlock innovative mindsets of your people. Strategy, engage all your stakeholders to achieve a common goal. So that's vital. In terms of metrics, empower teams to succeed with data-driven decision making. There's not a lot of that actually goes on in business, but that is the way you move forward, particularly if you want to introduce AI and machine learning. It's crucial. Plan, greater collaboration and proactive actions. Validate, facilitates bringing all the learning back into the business. Deviation, learn how to capitalize your strengths and weaknesses. And then lessons, what we're looking at doing here is accelerating the rate of improvement in future performance. And evolve is enhance skill sets and identifies innovative future leaders. So that's a big bomb to drop it right at the end, but this is what we've been talking through for the past 3 previous presentations, and it's the lessons learned is where it really hits home. So that's it. I've just about managed it in 45 minutes. Apologies for the problems during the film, but we are sort of going through some tricky times, and we're all relying on the internet, which is up and down, particularly here in Ireland. When we have a storm, we tend to struggle a little bit. So has anybody got any questions at all? Okay. Okay, anyway. Okay, thank you everybody for joining me. Yes, I think this was recorded, so I think they'll be recording this. Anybody wants to go through, but again, thank you for coming, joining in, and I hope you pick something up from that. For me, it's a very interesting topic to talk about, and even my views on it and approach is evolving still, and. Have a safe journey back wherever you're going, or if if you're going anywhere, if you're in the office, and obviously stay safe and keep your distance. Thank you very much.